I imagine everyone in this room has had a hand in training our warfighters, both U.S. and coalition troops, for decisive action. We prepare the force so that they can secure the future. And one individual in this auditorium plays a particularly important role in this effort. Lieutenant General Keith Walker, Deputy Commanding General Futures and the Director of the Army Capabilities Integration Center, leads the development and integration of force capabilities across the doctrine, organization, training, materiel, leadership, education, personnel, and facilities for the Army in support of Joint Force Commanders. A graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and alumni of the prestigious Harvard University, Lieutenant General Walker is one of the Army's most esteemed officers. Commissioned an armor officer in 1976, his military career has called for him to serve in a variety of positions across the world. More recently, from 2008 to 2009, he was the commanding general of the Iraq Assistance Group. He then commanded the Brigade Modernization Command at Fort Bliss, Texas, before assuming his current role as the Army Capabilities Integration Center. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the keynote speaker, Lieutenant General Keith Walker.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning. This is exactly the small, intimate gathering of training specialists I anticipated. And I would like to recognize a few special trainers that are here with us today. General Paul Gorman, thanks for being here, sir. And Lieutenant General Larry Farrell, President of NDIA, and Rear Admiral Fred Lewis, our NTSA President. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and it's good to see a lot of friends among the distinguished guests in the audience. I'm General Bob Cohn's Deputy for Futures, as Jim indicated, the Army Capabilities Integration Center, ARCIC. And we do two big things for the Army. We do concepts and capabilities, and that is exactly where you fit in, training capabilities. You know, I remember very distinctly learning to use scopes and reel train in the Armor Officer Basic Course in 1976. And some of y'all may remember that. I mean, the state of the art was you hung numbers on the sides of vehicles, and if you could see them through your sights, then you got credit for shooting the vehicle. But not too long after that, I really first saw the potential for training technology. In the winter of 1981, the cavalry troop I was assigned to went to this desolate ghost town called Fort Irwin, California. And we tested a new device they called the Multiple Integrated Laser Equipment System, or MILES. And we tested with B units that they had set up on the mountains in a small area of Fort Irwin that would track the locations of the M48 tanks and gas burner 113s that we had drawn from the California National Guard there. And we've really come a long way. I mean, since then, you know, think of the Unit Conduct of Fire Trainer, or UCOFT, and the Simulations Network, SIMNet, CCTT, Combined Arms Tactical Trainer, JANIS, later JCATS. You know, the training revolution that accompanied the Army's Big Five, the M1 tank, M2 Bradley, the Patriot, AH-64 attack helicopter, and UH-60 utility helicopter. The whole idea of virtual, constructive, and live training, combined with the concept of combat training centers, really produced the Army and reflects the rest of the joint force that defeated Saddam Hussein in 100 hours in 1981, and so much more for our military. So where are we today, given that background and that what I think is fair to call a revolution in training? Well, I think our emphasis on training has kind of taken a back seat to the rapid acquisition of material in support of our warfighters over the last 10 years. I mean, it's not to say that we have not trained, but that we have trained differently, specifically focused on the fights in Iraq and Afghanistan. Whereas before the war, we were an Army that trained for infrequent, sometimes deployments that never came. We have been, over the last 10 years, an Army that deployed and fought continuously. I mean, my oldest son is a captain with 6 years of service, and he's soon due back from his third year deployment, 2 in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. He looks at training a whole lot differently than I do. So what does the future hold? ARCIC recently hosted an alternative future seminar. And this is where we brought together a group of academic experts, government officials, military officers from the United States, all services, and our international partners to discuss what we thought the world would look like in 2015, 2020, and 2028. Not that we expected to predict correctly what the future was like, but to ensure that we did everything we could to make sure we didn't get the future wrong. And there were a few big areas of consensus I'd share with you. One is that the next decade would be dominated by the economy, that the next decade would be dominated by escalating cyber threats, increased importance of the Pacific region, and unpredictable impact of the Arab Spring. Lots of other conclusions, but those are the big four that I recall. And the development of Army operating concepts, given that future, are going to drive the capabilities that our soldiers and their formations need. So the national security landscape is changing at home and abroad, and we are facing significant resource challenges at home, and our military services are called upon to be part of the solution. We have large numbers of soldiers and Marines, airmen and sailors who are headed home. And there's going to be even a greater need to leverage simulations for training, education, and developing the right capabilities that we'll need in the future. We cannot afford to build several different armies, each equipped to meet the variety of missions that we anticipate. Our chairman, General Marty Dempsey, recently stated that today the range of threats are different. We're never going to try to build a force that's only capable of doing one thing at a time. That would be silly. That would be ill-advised. In this environment, we must train. My boss says it's an art form, training your soldiers, and our future commanders had better embrace it if they're going to be successful. So, in order to meet the many missions that we're given in many different operational environments, while tightening our belts to help our nation successfully overcome current budget challenges, we're putting a tremendous amount of pressure on our units and leaders to maintain their ability to organize, equip, and train for diverse contingencies. Success requires the ability to adapt to changing situations and rapidly modernize our organizations and equipment. Train quickly, all the while immersed in the environment in which we will operate. And these future environments, simulations and immersive environments, will not be left at home station, but they need to deploy with our units. They're going to be critical enablers, allowing units to adapt to mission changes and support mission planning, refinement, and rehearsals. So how do we get there? I think in many ways we're already on our way. And I wanted to talk with you about my last 2 years in El Paso and how, with my experience of those 2 years, how the Army's adapting its business practices that will enable us to provide better training capabilities for our soldiers and formations. You know, in 2009, our Army's modernization strategy was all about future combat systems. This was a concept we developed in around the year 2000, a vision of about how we would fight an enemy somewhere out 25 years in the future. And in April of 2009, Secretary Gates gave some pretty clear guidance along with the termination of the ground component of future combat systems. He told the Army to figure out what to do with about 20,000 MRAPs. He told us to continue product improvements of our major systems. He said we should develop a ground combat vehicle, that the whole idea of a network sounded pretty good, that we ought to work on that. And oh, by the way, anything left over from future combat systems that might benefit the rest of the Army, we ought to spin them out to the rest of the force. So what happened to FCS, in which we'd invested so much? At the risk of oversimplifying a bit, I think it's fair to say that the threat and technology changed faster than our acquisition and development systems could move. I mean, we ended up with a ground platform that could not defeat an IED. There's a lot of other stuff that I think is evidence about our system not working. I mean, we have some organizations that didn't exist before the war. The Joint IED Defeat Organization. In the Army, we have Rapid Equipment Fielding. We have the Asymmetric Warfare Group. And I would argue that these organizations wouldn't exist if our system worked. But it didn't. We could not get equipment or new capabilities in the hands of soldiers fast enough. So we and the other services came up with ways to make it happen in support of our deployed soldiers. Now, when the Future Combat System was terminated in 2009, the Army was doing evaluations with a small brigade called the Army Evaluation Task Force, about 1,150 soldiers. And the whole idea was that they were going to evaluate the Future Combat Systems as it developed, and they would eventually be the seed corn for the first FCS brigade. Now, when I arrived at Fort Bliss in August of 2009, the Army was beginning an evaluation of the spin-outs that Secretary Gates had encouraged us to do. Specifically, there was a small unmanned ground vehicle, kind of looks like Wall-E the robot that you see in cartoons. The Class 1 unmanned air system, which soldiers called a flying beer keg because that's what it looked like, big hovering lawnmower sounding contraption with wonderful optics on it. An unattended urban ground system, which is kind of like baby monitors on steroids. Soldiers could clear a room, slap these little boxes up on the wall, and then through optical and seismic and acoustic sensors, you could tell whether or not someone else came in the room. There was also a tactical unmanned ground sensor, and then there was the network integration kit. And the evaluation was about a company size, a small company. I say company because it had a company headquarters, and then it had a big platoon, and it operated in the flat desert in about a 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer square area centered around a little village, Adobe Village. And you know, once a soldier had assaulted Adobe Village about the 23rd time, he pretty well had it down. But honestly, given the maturity of the systems at that point, it really wasn't a bad thing. And the outcome of that limited user test, what the conclusion was, the stuff still needs work. We'll work on it, we'll fix it, and we'll try it again next year. But soon after that, some pretty significant things happened. The Army decided that it would field all of the spin-out technology to the 3rd Brigade 1st Armored Division, which was a newly forming infantry brigade combat team headed to Afghanistan in 2012. So when we learned that, just after this recent experience, we do a few back-of-the-envelope calculations. If we're going to field that to a whole brigade in 2012, we need to do an entire brigade evaluation in 2011. And here it was 2009, we just did a small company. We need to do something in 2010 that's a bit bigger, at least battalion level. And oh, by the way, they're headed to Afghanistan, so a platoon with Humvees, since we don't use them in Afghanistan, we've got some adjustments to make. So we set about doing a 2010 evaluation. That it was a battalion size. The Army equipped them with MRAPs, Shadows, unmanned air systems, Raven unmanned air systems. We replicated what a battalion in Afghanistan had. We also expanded the operating environment to about a 25 to 35 mile area across the desert of White Sands Missile Range. We're able to use the cave complexes in the mountains in the east and the west, or the old mine shafts, to replicate cave complexes, which we really needed to do to work the robotics, really give them a workout, and to give the unmanned air systems a workout. The result of doing that and really challenging the robotics and the non-line of sight situations you have in that type altitude with that mountainous terrain we determined to field one system out of the 5. Because when you ask the soldiers the ultimate question, if you had to deploy tomorrow, would you want this capability in your full spectrum toolkit? The soldiers are not bashful. So the small unmanned ground vehicle is in Afghanistan right now, directly as a result of the feedback from soldiers. 3 of the systems we stopped development on. And one system, the network integration kit, the determination was it's got potential, but it needs a little work. My number one lesson that I learned out of all this was the faster you get a new capability in the hands of a soldier, along with the engineer that developed that capability, and training, material, and combat developers, the faster you will advance a solution that has potential, or you will simply stop doing something that's stupid and not spend any more time and resources on it. It's a powerful idea, the idea about in the field, in an operational environment, to test, fix, test. Now, I want to talk about one example because it relates to the potential of what this has for our training. I mentioned the network integration kit was a piece of equipment that was determined had potential. The network integration kit was no more than a radio, specifically a jitters ground mobile radio, a software-defined radio, works like over voice over IP, and it was slaved to a router and its own computer, and it was placed in an MRAP. And the whole idea of the network integration kit was to allow the linkage of sensors with the network. So for example, that small unmanned ground vehicle I talked about, or the flying beer keg I talked about, the pictures that those could take would come back into the network integration kit and then would enter the network so that image could proliferate to the company headquarters, battalion headquarters, brigade headquarters. I mean, that was the whole idea of it. But what our soldiers told us was they really didn't care. It was a neat capability, but when you think about it, it was a squad or a fire team that was clearing a building with a small unmanned ground vehicle, and that information was relevant only at the squad level. Battalion headquarters didn't care. It was perishable information. But what they did determine with the network integration kit was very powerful. The soldiers asked the engineers, hey, could you put a USB port in the computer of the NIC? Because when I take my camera, I could take a picture of it, and then through the NIC, I could share that picture with my friends. So the engineers, not only did they put a USB port in it, they added a laptop, another laptop. They called it an input-output kit. And what soldiers who ended up doing then was they were using chat through that laptop, through the network integration kit and the wideband network waveform to communicate with one another. Chat has become the de facto main network in Afghanistan right now. They also used the network integration kit where a higher headquarters like the battalion could send a complete operations order using a user-friendly Microsoft Office format and attach pictures or operational sketches to it. And there was no latency in it, whereas our current system was rather cumbersome. It was a very powerful thing because a soldier simply turned to the engineer and said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could do that? And they did that on the spot and tried it in the field. Now, the network integration kit still had some problems. It was pretty cumbersome. Size, weight, and power was big. In fact, he ended up now with 3 computers in an MRAP. The Future Battle Command and Control system that we already had, the computer that went with the NIC, and then the laptop that they added as an input-output kit. And when I put the NIC into operation with a huge checklist and assistant after the 3rd try, it still took me 50 minutes to do it. Whereas the standard would be like you and I would want on our laptop if we were driving down the road in the passenger seat and hooking up with Wi-Fi. You'd be connected in less than 10 minutes. Well, about 3 months after this, they got it down from the 50 minutes that I did to less than 8 minutes. But again, that illustrates the power of the communications of the soldier with the developer. Now, I tell you this story to offer this thought. What the soldiers did with the network integration kit is what soldiers will and can do to help mature training concepts and training devices and simulations as they learn and become more agile in their thinking. The Army's modernization strategy since FCS has adjusted quite a bit, and it's now incremental modernization, brigade modernization. Brigade modernization, because brigade is still our fundamental deployable formation. Incremental, because it recognizes that we either cannot afford to give everyone a particular capability, or the technology of a new capability might be such that if you gave it to everybody, it would be obsolete by the time you issued it to the whole Army. So therefore, we prioritize to deploying units when we issue them increments of the latest capabilities. Essentially, we're buying less stuff, but we're buying it more often. Now, in keeping with that strategy, the Army determined, let's make Fort Bliss and White Sands Missile Range the centerpiece for integrated network evaluations. Now, why Fort Bliss and White Sands? Because it's the largest air, ground, and spectrum space in the continental United States. It's just larger than the size of the state of Connecticut. It has desert, it has mountains, and if you go far enough north in the Lincoln National Forest, like we just did last month, there's wooded terrain in the high mountains of New Mexico. It's 183 miles from Fort Bliss to the northern end of White Sands. So what we're able to do is, by spreading a brigade out, is to challenge the capabilities that we're evaluating and putting them on roughly the same amount of space that they're occupying in Iraq and Afghanistan. The other thing about Fort Bliss is you have the 1st Armored Division there. After it redeployed from Germany, it's the largest density of a variety of types of units. So you've got 2 heavy brigade combat teams, a striker brigade combat team, a light brigade, a combined arms, a combat aviation brigade, sustainment brigade, air defense brigade, engineer battalion, MP battalion. So if you need a capability beyond a specific type of brigade, it's all there in one place, and the Army can do the evaluations much more efficiently. Now, recognizing in this new strategy that the network was the priority and that you couldn't actually evaluate an entire network in modeling and simulations, the Army assigned a brigade combat team of the 1st Armored Division the evaluation mission. So that small evaluation task force went away, and they built the 2nd Brigade of 1st Armored Division with the assigned mission to evaluate capabilities. The Army also established Brigade Modernization Command, an expression about how serious the Army was at trying to smartly evaluate new capability solutions. The Brigade Modernization Command has the authority to organize the 2nd Brigade 1st Armored Division in any way needed to evaluate capabilities. So they did it in a composite fashion, and this is what I mean by composite. One of the Combined Arms Battalions was organized as if it was in Afghanistan, light infantry MRAP equipped. The other battalion organized as a standard Combined Arms Battalion with tanks and Bradleys, because there's evaluations we need to do on the heavy side of the force also. The reconnaissance squadron, we had a troop with a light troop with MRAPs, a heavy troop with Bradleys, and a striker troop, because there are challenges with the EPLARS-based network of Stryker to maintain linkage with the rest non-EPLARS equipped units, and we had to figure out how to do that. The artillery battalion had a light battery of the 777 howitzers, the favorite in Afghanistan, and a heavy battery of 109 self-propelled howitzers. Now, the reason why we did that is because the brigade gives the Army 2 very important capabilities. One is to evaluate new capabilities across the spectrum. I mean, we don't want to just know if something works in wide area security like Afghanistan. You also want to know if it works in a combined arms maneuver, high-intensity conflict-like scenario. So organizing the brigade in that fashion gives us the ability to do that. The other thing it does is it gives us the ability to evaluate things quickly. I cannot tell you how many times someone from industry has come up and said, I've got a great idea, the Army, our soldiers really need this, and I always wish I had the capability to say, okay, bring it on out, we'll give it to a squad, platoon, company, or what have you, and we'll try it and see if it works. We could not do that with the before. Now, with a full brigade combat team, we have the resources where we can do that, and that is exactly what we've done. We've now gone to 2 evaluations a year on a regular cycle. Every spring and every fall, there's a 3-month period where the Army evaluates new capability solutions. When we do the new capability solutions, the first part of that 3-month period is new equipment fielding and new equipment training. And the second part of the evaluation is the entire brigade combat team in the field looking at that equipment. We also sought, now that we had this ability, we need to evaluate things differently. Our standard system for programs of record, as it moves through the paces of DoD 5000, the JSITS process, going to Army Test and Evaluation Command for formal test, is a very expensive, cumbersome, and frankly, a slow system. It's not that we're not going to have programs of record. Those are going to remain. So that is one type of evaluation that will continue. But what if we could just try something out? If it's not a program of record, but it's a good idea, and it was available, what if we could just give it to the 2nd Brigade, put it out in the field, and try it out? And we can. There's a couple of examples. And I want to split these into 2 categories. When a unit goes to Afghanistan or Iraq, it falls in on theater-provided equipment, so-called because it's not normal issue. It's stuff that you get when you get to theater. And the best example I can give you is much of our network. When I went to Afghanistan last January, so that to understand the Afghan network so I could replicate it, many of the systems that the soldiers had, they did not receive in the United States. They'd not been able to train on it. And while they were actually conducting operations in Afghanistan, were a bit frustrated as they tried to implement things like satellite terminals, high-capacity line-of-sight radios that would allow them to get data down to the smallest outpost. What if we took systems like that and evaluated them at Fort Bliss and White Sands first, then made an assessment and sent them to the field? The other category I'd offer would be new stuff. What if industry came up with a great idea, a fresh idea? Wouldn't it be great if we could try it out and determine that this is either a dumb thing, stop it, don't put any more effort in it, or this has unbelievable potential, let's get it out, let's evaluate it and get it to soldiers downrange. That is in fact what's happening. In June and July, which was a evaluation that we just completed, instead of doing 5 capability evaluations, the 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division evaluated 35 different capabilities. In the evaluation just completed 2 weeks ago, they evaluated over 50 capabilities. And among those 50 were 11 industry nominations, if you will. What we did was we identified certain capability gaps, in this case specifically the network, issued a sources sought statement, and within 30 days had over 70 different white paper nominations from industry about their solutions that they thought would get after our gap. After reviewing the technical and integration feasibility of those systems, 11 of them came out and were evaluated. Now as we look at the next evaluation coming up in the spring, we have about 14 different industry nominations for direct evaluation by the 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division. So, this is what I see as a significant opportunity for training models and simulations. We can leverage models and sims to help soldiers in the 2-1AD prepare because they have to maintain their training. They are a regular brigade combat team. They're not a test outfit. That's what they get their credibility for. Or perhaps even more powerful, of greater benefit to the Army and joint community, we can have that brigade evaluate new training capabilities in order to support ideas for home station training with our soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iraq. There's potential to look at everything from small unit versus simulations to broader combat training center type missions supported by an aerial after-action review, feedback using sensor platforms that are already organic. There's also tremendous potential to evaluate how rapidly soldiers learn and how much they retain and what new training models and different combinations we can apply. Training developers and simulations experts work in side by side with soldiers to get real-time feedback on the best methods and tools to support their training. And later this afternoon, you'll have the opportunity to hear General Paul Gorman speak, and I recommend you attend that session. Some highlights that I have from his counsel. We need to focus our efforts and challenge industry to help us fully develop truly immersive virtual training environments for the dismounted soldier. We've been very successful developing crew and system training devices for armor and aviation weapon systems, but we've forgotten to include the basic squad as a system required training. We can no longer ignore the needs of the individual soldier and his teammates. We need realistic, immersive, and tailorable environments that can provide challenging training situations to better prepare the dismounted soldier for operations. It's going to take some time to get the word out, and we're working on it. The potential for evaluations in Fort Bliss and El Paso, not only simulations, training, live, virtual, and constructive in an area the size of the state of Connecticut. Let me conclude with just a couple thoughts on the way ahead in areas you could help us with. First is we really need to focus on the squad. If you think since World War II about what we've done with our capability for aircraft and ships and tanks, it's an unbelievable difference. But the squad is pretty much the squad, except you got 70 pounds of extra kit to put on your back. We do not want to put our soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors in a fair fight. And we've got to figure out for that squad how to give them the overmatch that they don't have, because the only fair fight that exists right now is at the squad. So, emphasis of the squad, that's big for us. You can help us get the word out. We need immersive environments with avatars for soldiers and leader training. I mean, these are ideal for preparation for regional contingencies. I mean, we have mass multiplayer online gaming. I think there's over 12 million people that play World of Warcraft. I mean, what if you had mass multiplayer online training? And then finally, I'd ask you to help us continue to find better ways to do business. We've got a good start using the evaluation system that is set up at Fort Bliss and White Sands, but there's still better ways to do business, and we'd appreciate your ideas. Ultimately, it's all about our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. With the 312 million people or so in the United States, it remains that less than 1% serve in Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, active and reserve. But because they have volunteered, the rest of us can sleep easy at night. And we can vote for whoever we want to, read whatever we want, listen to whatever we want, worship God in any way that we want. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you this morning. And I'd gladly, if there's time, I'd gladly entertain any questions.
General Walker, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. It was great to hear about how you see training in the future.